Have you ever felt like something was off, but couldn't explain why? A look, a sentence, a strange gut feeling that something wasn't right, yet everyone else tells you you're too sensitive or just overthinking. If you've ever doubted your own reality in the face of subtle, invisible manipulation, you may have been caught in the web of a narcissist, but don't worry. In this video, we're not going to fight fire with fire. We're going to expose the truth. Calmly, clearly, and powerfully, through the eyes of someone narcissists fear the most, the super empath. Narcissists lie, distort, and create chaos to stay in control. But super empaths, they see through it all. They don't argue, they don't react, they reflect, observe, and hold on to truth like a lifeline. And that's what shatters the narcissist's illusion. Reality that refuses to be rewritten. Today, you'll discover 8 powerful ways a super empath exposes a narcissist, dismantling their false narrative piece by piece without raising their voice. If you've ever been manipulated, gaslit, or made to question your own mind, this video is for you. You're not crazy. You're seeing clearly. Hit subscribe to join a community that sees through the lies and chooses healing over confusion, and watch until the end, because the final strategy might be the one thing a narcissist never wants you to understand. 1. Staying clear-headed in the emotional maze. A narcissist doesn't manipulate you with facts. They manipulate you with feelings. They don't need a solid argument. They don't even have to be right. All they need is to make you feel wrong, to confuse you, to guilt you, to make you question yourself. And once they've hijacked your emotions, they don't need to win the logic. They've already won you. They pull you into an emotional maze where right and wrong blur, where you ask yourself if you're overreacting, if you're misunderstood, or worse, if you're going crazy. That's their arena, and if you walk in with your heart wide open and your mind unguarded, they'll play you like a song. They'll use your compassion to silence you, your empathy to justify their behavior, and little by little, you'll start losing ownership of your own mind. But the super empath is different. They don't get lost in that maze. They walk into it with a sharpened internal compass. Clarity. A super empath doesn't let emotion drive their perception. They observe their emotions, but they don't let emotions dictate reality. They feel the wave, but they don't let it sweep away their reason. And that is what terrifies a narcissist. Someone they can't drag into chaos. Picture this. The narcissist provokes a fight, a guilt trip, a backhanded comment. The goal isn't resolution. The goal is reaction. If you react, they win. If you get angry, they get to blame you. If you apologize, they gain power. If you go silent, they manipulate your guilt. In every scenario, you lose control. But when you, like the super empathy, remain centered, you shatter that cycle. You don't lash out. You don't explain. You don't chase clarity from someone who thrives on confusion. You simply observe, remember, and refuse to participate in the performance. And to a narcissist, that's a revolution. You become unreadable, untouchable, uncontrollable. You're no longer an actor in their play. You're the audience, watching their mask slowly slip off. And when you're standing outside the emotional maze, you hold the power. True power doesn't come from yelling. It doesn't come from clever comebacks. It comes from the ability to remain calm inside the emotional storm someone else is trying to pull you into. That's the kind of strength that sends narcissists spiraling, because truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand still. Super empaths don't react impulsively. They aren't driven by fear, guilt, or a desperate need to be understood. They don't need validation from the narcissist. They only need to be loyal to their own reality. And that loyalty, that consistency, is the hammer that breaks down every emotionally constructed lie. They aren't heartless, far from it. They feel deeply. But they know how to separate feeling from truth. And in a maze built on deception, that distinction is what leads them out, while the narcissist remains trapped in the chaos they created. 2. Watching behavior instead of believing words. A narcissist can say anything, and they're good at it. They promise, they justify, they swear, they rationalize, they even confess in dramatic, emotional ways to earn your trust back. But to a super empath, words mean nothing if they don't come with consistent behavior. This is where narcissists begin to lose the long game. They're being watched, not with ears, but with eyes. A narcissist might say, "I love you unconditionally," but their actions are cold, manipulative, and hurtful. They may say, "I'll change," but nothing ever changes. A typical empath might hesitate, hold on to hope, or try to explain away the toxic behavior. But a super empath, they don't buy the performance. They demand alignment between word and action. Super empaths notice the little things. They detect the cracks, the stories that shift each time they're told, the inconsistencies, the delay in answers, the subtle deflections, and they remember. They collect the details quietly, patiently, until one day all the scattered pieces click into place. And they realize they're not dealing with a loving partner, but with someone who's been playing the role of one. For a narcissist, this realization is catastrophic, because narcissists live by their image, an image constructed entirely through words. But super empaths aren't seduced by pretty sentences. They dig beneath the surface, paying close attention to what's done, not just what's said. When words and actions don't match, the super empath trusts the actions. They don't need to catch someone red-handed. They don't need evidence on tape. They operate from a place of deep, trained intuition, sharpened by experience and relentless observation. And when something feels off, they don't ignore it for the sake of keeping peace. They notice, they investigate, they wait. They watch the pattern unfold without getting emotionally swept into it. One lie might be a mistake. 3 or 5 or 10, that's a pattern. And once that pattern reveals itself to the super empath, the game is over. No need to yell, no dramatic confrontation. Sometimes all it takes is one calm sentence. "You said A, but you did B. Can you explain that?" And just like that, the narcissist stumbles. Because narcissists aren't afraid of being disliked. They're afraid of being seen. Super empaths don't attack. They don't insult. They simply reflect. They become a mirror, one that shows the narcissist exactly what they are without distortion or emotional filter. And narcissists can't stand to look at themselves without applause. That's the power of watching, not believing. It makes the super empath the most dangerous threat to a narcissist, not because they're loud, but because they're clear-headed, not because they confront, but because they see. And their quiet presence says everything. I see you. I'm not afraid. And I'm not playing along. 3. Not reacting the way the narcissist expects. A narcissist doesn't just want you to react, they depend on it. Their entire manipulation strategy rests on a single premise. They control your emotions and you behave accordingly. They throw out provocation, criticism, mockery, or even self-victimization to push you into a defensive posture, and the moment you get angry, argue back, or start explaining, they win. Because at that point, you've stepped onto their stage. You've become a character in the drama they've written. And now everything you say, every emotion you express, becomes ammunition to twist, distort, and use to reinforce their victim role. But the super empath doesn't react the way they expect. When attacked, they don't explode. When blamed, they don't justify. When lied about, they don't beg for fairness. They remain calm and observant, as if watching a play they've seen a dozen times and memorized every line. And that calm, it throws the narcissist into disarray. They can't read it. They can't provoke it. They can't ignite the emotional chaos they rely on to make you spiral. And when they can't control your emotions, they lose their grip. The super empath doesn't react. They choose their response. They might feel hurt, but they don't collapse. They might feel confused, but they stay grounded. And every time they refuse to play by the narcissist's script, They shatter a piece of the manipulation's framework, not with force, not with shouting, but with emotional non-cooperation, a power the narcissist has no defense against. 4. Setting clear, non-negotiable boundaries. One of the most dangerous vulnerabilities of the empath is their open heart. They love deeply, believe in the goodness of others, and always try to understand rather than judge. But when empathy comes without boundaries, it stops being a virtue and becomes fertile ground for manipulation. To a narcissist, nothing is more inviting than someone who doesn't know how to say no. Because in the fog of blurred limits, in every moment of emotional softness, in every whispered let it go, they find the perfect opportunity to push. One step further, then another, until they've colonized your emotional, mental, even physical space. But the super empath is different. They've been the forgiver. They've been the one who gave the benefit of the doubt. They've been manipulated by their own kindness, and they've learned the most vital lesson. Empathy without boundaries is self-betrayal. They learn to set boundaries, clear, firm, and non-negotiable. When a narcissist tries to assert control, the super empath doesn't scream or argue. They simply say no, calmly, decisively, without apology, without explanation. Because the truth is, you don't owe anyone a justification for protecting your peace. And this drives the narcissist mad. They're not used to being refused. Their power thrives on your discomfort, your fear of conflict, your desire to keep the peace. But when they're met with someone who isn't afraid to upset them if it means self-respect, the narcissist loses grip. Boundaries aren't walls built from fear. They're declarations of self-worth. They say, I know who I am. I know what I accept and what I don't. And I don't need your permission to be myself. Super empaths don't set boundaries to punish. They set them to preserve their wholeness. They don't play the victim. They don't try to reform the narcissist. They simply create enough space to remain whole and make it crystal clear, this is the line, you do not cross it. And when that boundary is set, the narcissist will test it with guilt, with charm, with pity, with nostalgia, with threats. But the super empath doesn't budge, because they've realized the moment you start negotiating with someone who doesn't respect boundaries, you've already lost that boundary. The true power of a boundary doesn't come from declaring it. It comes from holding it when it's challenged. Not everyone will like your clarity, but that's the cost of freedom. And the super empath is willing to pay that price, because they don't want love if it's laced with control, and they don't want peace if it's built on silence and submission. They choose truth, even if it makes them stand alone. They choose freedom, even if it costs them people. And in that choice, they reclaim themselves. 5. Seeing contradictions as red flags, not personal failures. Narcissists have a particularly insidious tactic. They make you believe that every contradiction is your fault, and things don't add up. When stories shift, timelines blur, or yesterday's words don't match today's. They don't offer clarity. They deflect. They guilt trip. You misunderstood. I never said that. You're imagining things. And if you're an empath, your instinct is to self-reflect. Maybe I did get it wrong. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe I'm expecting too much. That internal pause, that willingness to look inward, is a noble trait. But for a narcissist, it's the perfect opportunity to distort reality. Because when you doubt yourself, they don't even have to lie that convincingly anymore. You're already rewriting the truth for them. But the super empath doesn't fall down that spiral. They might pause to double-check their memory, but when they notice a repeated, illogical and persistent pattern of contradiction, they don't turn against themselves. They start asking questions. They understand that when reality starts to feel confusing, when stories don't line up, when their gut says something is off, that's not a glitch. That's a warning light. Just like when the red light on your car's dashboard blinks, you don't ignore it or unscrew the bulb because it stresses you out. You check the engine. That's exactly how the super empath treats contradiction. as an invitation to look deeper, and they do it without guilt. Because they've learned a harsh truth, manipulators will always blame your feelings, and if you agree, you've already surrendered your reality. The super empath doesn't allow that. They stand by their sense of perception, not because they believe they're infallible, but because they respect themselves enough to listen. And when that perception is repeatedly twisted by another person, they start to wonder if maybe the problem isn't there. They track the contradiction. They connect the scattered red flags. And soon enough, they see a full-scale system of manipulation. When the narcissist lies, when they flip narratives, when they assign blame, it's all part of a pattern, not rooted in truth, but in the need to dominate. This clarity makes the super empath immune to gaslighting, because they no longer accept the burden of trying to make sense of a senseless story. They no longer shrink themselves to avoid being labeled too suspicious or too intense. They begin to trust their discomfort as a valid signal, not a flaw to suppress. And that is terrifying for a narcissist, because the moment you stop blaming yourself, they lose their sharpest weapon, your guilt. The super empath understands a repeated contradiction is not a system error. It's the sign of a system designed to distort truth on purpose. 6. Healing yourself to break free from the cycle of codependency. A super empath doesn't just see others clearly. They also know how to look within themselves. They don't stop at exposing the narcissist. They don't stay stuck in the role of the poor victim forever. On the contrary, they are the ones brave enough to ask the most painful question, did I stay so long? That question isn't about self-blame, it's the gateway to true healing. Because the super empath understands something fundamental, manipulation only works when there's a wound inside you it can hook into. An old scar, a buried belief that you're not enough, a fear of abandonment you haven't faced. And so, they begin the hardest journey of all, turning inward and confronting themselves. They realize that for years they weren't just being manipulated by the narcissist, they were being driven by their own unmet need for validation, love, and worthiness. They sacrificed themselves to keep the relationship going. They stayed silent to avoid conflict. They tried to do everything right, hoping that love could change someone who didn't want to change. This is the core of codependency, a form of emotional reliance that narcissists exploit like artists, and the super empath, before awakening, is often the perfect target. But once they recognize this cycle, they refuse to repeat it. They start rebuilding from the inside. They learn to love themselves unconditionally, not for someone else, not to earn approval, but because they deserve it. They stop chasing love from people who don't know how to give it, and instead, they give it to themselves freely. And when that shift happens, when the super empath no longer needs the narcissist's approval, the game ends. The narcissist can't manipulate someone who doesn't need them. They can't pressure someone who no longer seeks external validation. They can't control someone who's made peace with solitude. Because the super empath has reclaimed their inner power, they no longer wait for someone to heal them. They do the healing themselves. They no longer run from their pain. They face it, understand it, and transform it into strength. They no longer let someone else define their worth. They define themselves through authenticity, unshakable self-respect, and emotional clarity. And when someone reaches that point, the narcissist's grip is completely broken, because the super empath is no longer a target. They're awake, no longer begging to be loved. They've learned to love themselves first, no longer afraid of being alone. They've learned how to stay with themselves. And in that space, they don't just leave the narcissist, they leave behind the old version of themselves, the version that thought love had to be earned through sacrifice, pain, or self-erasure. Now, true love doesn't hurt, and the super empath will never again accept any kind of love that demands the death of their identity. 7. Choosing to hold on to reality instead of letting others define it. In the narcissist's world, truth is not a foundation, it's a tool. A fluid, shape-shifting concept molded to fit their moods and motives. They don't just lie, they make you doubt your own perception of reality. That's gaslighting, That's what erodes your trust in your own mind, in your own senses, in your own truth. But the super empath doesn't let that happen. They've been hurt enough to understand one core truth. If you lose your grip on reality, you lose everything. You lose your voice, your choices, your ability to protect yourself. You become a passenger in a story someone else is writing about your life. The super empath chooses a different path. They hold on to their reality like a sacred fortress. They trust what they see, what they hear, what they feel. They don't let someone, no matter how charming or cruel, erode that inner compass. When something feels wrong, they don't dismiss it. They listen. They investigate. And if the facts don't add up, they don't gaslight themselves to keep the peace. They dig deeper. Here's the difference. The manipulated person constantly rewrites their own perception to match the narcissist's narrative. The super empath does the opposite. They hold on to their perception and make the narcissist answer to their own contradiction. This is what narcissists can't tolerate. Someone who won't be spun. Someone who doesn't need external validation to trust themselves. Someone whose reality doesn't bend under pressure or volume. To the narcissist, truth is a weapon. To the super empath, truth is a compass. And when someone holds that compass steady, unwavering, grounded, they shine a spotlight the narcissist can't escape. At that moment, every lie starts to tremble. Every mask begins to crack. Because the super empath doesn't just reflect truth. They live in it, breathe in it, move through it every day. And you know what happens to a lie no one believes anymore? It dies. The narcissist's control doesn't come from force. It comes from the cooperation of others. When people stop cooperating, stop accepting the distortions, stop living in a reality that isn't theirs, the entire illusion collapses. No screaming, no chaos. Just one calm, quiet, immovable declaration. I trust my memory, I trust my feelings, I trust myself. That's when the narcissist has nothing left. Their narrative falls apart, their power disintegrates, and the super empath, once a victim, becomes completely free. 8. Speaking the truth calmly and precisely. There's a kind of power that doesn't come from noise, conflict, or confrontation. It comes from utter calm when telling the truth. Narcissists are masters of misdirection. They twist narratives, play the victim, assign blame, and launch counterattacks, all triggered the moment you lose your composure. A sharp tone, an emotional outburst, a frustrated accusation. That's all they need to shift the focus from their lies to your emotions. And once again they win, because now you're playing on their turf, the emotional arena, where they reign supreme. But with a super empath, the game doesn't unfold the same way. They don't need to shout, "You're lying." They don't need to expose the narcissist in front of a crowd. They simply state the truth, calmly, clearly, and at a moment that leaves no room for distortion. "You said this on that day. I still have the message. You told me one thing before, and now you're saying something else. What you're doing doesn't align with what you said." No added emotion, no judgment, no accusatory tone. Just a chain of facts delivered with surgical precision. And when the truth is spoken that way, it leaves no entry point for manipulation. The narcissist can't play the victim if no one attacked them. They can't weaponize your emotions if you don't give them any. They can't flip the narrative when the person across from them remains unshaken and completely lucid. That's when they get stuck. Because truth doesn't need emotional coloring, it stands on its own. Because a super empath doesn't need drama to have power, they have power because they're in control of themselves. When a super empath speaks, they're not trying to win, they're not retaliating, they're simply bringing the truth into the light, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. They know that when truth is presented calmly, people can feel it. They don't have to convince anyone. They simply create the space for truth to resonate. And that is precisely where the narcissist has no defense. They thrive in emotional chaos, but they collapse in the face of steady logic. They're good at blame, not at accountability. They're experts at editing the past, but completely exposed when standing before someone who remembers everything and pieces it all together without missing a beat. The calmness of the super empath is not weakness. It's the highest form of strength, because when you speak the truth with precise clarity and no resentment, it becomes instantly obvious to everyone who is grounded and who is scrambling to maintain their mask. And in that quiet, weaponless war, the narcissist ends up shooting themselves with their own contradictions. You see, a super empath doesn't fight with fists. They don't need to shout to be heard. They don't need to tear anyone down to prove their strength. They simply speak the truth, live in truth, and trust the truth. And in a world where narcissists build their power in darkness, that light is the one thing they can never control. If you've ever been manipulated, doubted yourself, or asked, "Is it my fault?" remember this: you're not weak for loving the wrong person, you're strong for waking up. A super empath isn't born powerful, they forge that power, reclaim it piece by piece, through every act of emotional betrayal, every moment of gaslighting, every time they were told they were too sensitive. And when they stop needing validation from the manipulator, when they stop doubting their own perception, they don't just survive, they become free. If this video awakens something in you, a memory, a buried truth, or even just a quiet voice saying, "Yes, this is what I've felt all along," then leave a comment below. Make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss content that helps you heal, gain clarity, and reclaim your reality. Share this video with someone you know who might be stuck in manipulation without realizing it, because the right words at the right moment can be the key that unlocks the door out of a toxic maze. Be the light. You don't need to scream. You just need to stop bowing to lies.